The story begins on a dark, restless night in medieval Europe, a time when whispers of secret orders and hidden treasures stirred both fear and fascination. The Knights Templar, the most powerful and enigmatic military order of their age, had already become a legend in their own time. Cloaked in white robes marked with a simple red cross, they were both feared and revered, a combination of warrior, monk, and banker. Their influence stretched from the battlefields of the Holy Land to the courts of kings, from secretive strongholds in France to hidden fortresses scattered across the European countryside. Yet in the early 14th century, this formidable order faced a cataclysm unlike any other. On a cold Friday in October of 1307, the unthinkable happened. The Templars were betrayed, arrested, and accused of heresy, blasphemy, and unimaginable crimes. Within days, the world of the Templars seemed to collapse into shadows and whispers. The order that had been untouchable, the guardians of sacred knowledge and immense wealth, vanished almost overnight. But disappearance is rarely absolute. Rumors began to circulate, first in hushed tones among merchants, sailors, and wandering scholars, that not all Templars had been captured or executed. Some had slipped away, perhaps through hidden tunnels beneath crumbling castles or secret passageways in remote abbeys. Others had boarded ships, their destinations cloaked in secrecy, their cargo a mystery that included both gold and knowledge, maps and manuscripts. The Templars, it seemed, had not disappeared. They had merely vanished from the eyes of those who sought to destroy them. And some of these whispers suggested something far more daring than mere survival. That the fleeing Templars had not only escaped Europe, but had sailed into the uncharted West, toward lands that were unknown to their contemporaries, lands across the vast and dangerous Atlantic Ocean. Maps from the period offer tantalizing hints. Ancient charts, many of them lost or hidden in private collections, depict coastlines that no European had yet officially discovered. Some show islands far west, beyond the reach of even the most adventurous Norse sailors. Legends speak of fleets leaving the port of La Rochelle, laden with treasure and secret knowledge, never to return. These were not ordinary merchant vessels. These were ships manned by some of the most disciplined and secretive warriors of their age, men trained not only in combat, but in the arcane arts of navigation, cryptography, and sacred geometry. If they had indeed sailed west, the consequences would be staggering, for they might have glimpsed continents that would remain invisible to the rest of Europe for another 2 centuries. They might have carried with them relics, manuscripts, and treasures that could reshape the understanding of history itself. And yet, for reasons that are only beginning to emerge, mainstream history has all but erased this possibility. The very notion that the Templars could have crossed the Atlantic challenges centuries of accepted scholarship. How could a medieval order, persecuted and hunted to the brink of extinction, have navigated the immense and stormy ocean before Columbus ever set sail? The answer, some researchers argue, lies in the extraordinary knowledge that the Templars accumulated over decades in the Holy Land. There, they had access to ancient libraries, maps, and scrolls preserved by civilizations older than Rome. They had learned the art of reading the stars, the currents, and the wind, and they had mastered shipbuilding to a degree that allowed them to survive even the most treacherous voyages. If any medieval Europeans could have made such a crossing, it would have been the Templars. And if they did, what secrets did they carry with them? What was so important that it demanded the risk of disappearing into an unknown world? We cannot fully understand the courage or the desperation that must have driven these men westward. Europe was no longer a safe place for them. Kings and popes alike had turned against them, and the once great order faced not just dissolution but annihilation. In such a context, fleeing beyond the horizon was not merely an adventure, it was survival. Yet even as they sailed into the unknown, the Templars would have been acutely aware of the stories and myths surrounding lands across the ocean. Norse sagas spoke of Vinland, fertile lands rich with resources, where strange peoples lived and wild forests stretched as far as the eye could see. Could these whispers have guided the Templars, offering them both hope and direction as they ventured into a world completely uncharted by contemporary European minds? Every decision, every course set across the rolling waves, carried with it the weight of centuries of knowledge, secrecy, and perhaps even prophecy. And what a legacy they left behind. If some of the Templars did reach the shores of the New World, then what remains of their presence? Some historians dismiss the possibility outright, pointing to a lack of concrete evidence. Yet the absence of proof is never proof of absence. Scattered clues, unusual stone carvings, enigmatic ruins, and oral traditions from indigenous peoples hint at encounters long forgotten or deliberately suppressed. There are accounts of white-robed strangers traveling among native communities, teaching new skills, and leaving behind symbols that echo the crosses and insignia of the Templar Order. Could these fleeting traces be the remnants of a voyage that dared to defy history itself? Or are they simply coincidences, artifacts misinterpreted through the lens of imagination and legend? The line between truth and myth becomes increasingly blurred as we attempt to piece together a story that was never meant to be told. In this journey, the Templars' voyage west is not merely a historical hypothesis. It is a meditation on secrecy, resilience, and the human drive to protect knowledge against forces that would see it destroyed. The notion of fleeing across a vast and unforgiving ocean, carrying treasures and secrets, speaks to a timeless struggle. The tension between power and persecution, between revelation and erasure. And as we trace their potential path from the stormy harbors of medieval Europe to the hidden forests and coasts of America, the story begins to unfold not only as a tale of history, but as a testament to the lengths humans will go to preserve their most precious truths. The Templars may have vanished from the pages of European chronicles, but the echoes of their journey could still be traced, hidden in plain sight, across continents and centuries. The waves of the Atlantic, relentless and eternal, may well have been the Templars' final refuge, carrying them away from persecution, into the unknown, and perhaps in a history itself, where their secrets waited patiently to be rediscovered. Europe in the early 14th century was a continent trembling under the weight of political intrigue, economic upheaval, and religious authority. The mighty Knights Templar, once the pride of Christendom, had become a target, their wealth and power a threat to kings and popes alike. King Philip IV of France, heavily indebted to the order, saw an opportunity to erase his debts and consolidate power by striking against these formidable warriors. On the morning of October 13th, 1307, under the cold veil of dawn, French forces descended upon Templar strongholds across the kingdom. Knights were seized without warning, accused of heresy, blasphemy, and abominable acts. The charges were often absurd, designed more to shame than to prove guilt, yet they served a deadly purpose. Fear spread like wildfire through the ranks of the Templars, a brotherhood that had once seemed untouchable, now suddenly vulnerable, hunted, and betrayed. The Templars had built their reputation on discipline, loyalty, and a network that spanned continents. Yet the very systems that had made them strong, secrecy, autonomy, and immense wealth, now became vulnerabilities. Within days, those captured were tortured, forced to confess to impossible crimes, and ultimately executed. The public spectacle of burning Templars at the stake sent a message. No one, not even the most devout or powerful, could escape the king's reach. The survivors, scattered and terrified, faced a terrifying choice: surrender and likely die, or vanish into the shadows and hope that the world beyond Europe might offer sanctuary. And so, What followed was not just the fall of an order, but the beginning of one of history's most mysterious exoduses. Stories of escape began to circulate almost immediately, though few dared to speak them aloud. Some knights vanished from castles during the chaos of arrest, slipping into forests and mountains where loyal supporters awaited. Others, wiser and more prepared, turned to the seas. Ports along the Atlantic, especially La Rochelle, were bustling with trade and maritime activity. Here, they could disappear among merchants and sailors, boarding ships under assumed identities. Whispers tell of fleets laden with treasure, sacred relics, and secret manuscripts slipping into the horizon, leaving only the faintest trace of their departure. These were not ordinary refugees. These were men trained in strategy, survival, and the art of secrecy. Every decision they made was calculated, every path chosen with a purpose. Their goal was not merely to survive, but to preserve what had been entrusted to them: knowledge, faith, and perhaps even truths too dangerous for the world to see. The atmosphere of betrayal and urgency cast a long shadow over Europe. Allies turned enemies overnight, and even those who had once admired the Templars hesitated to offer sanctuary. They had to move with cunning and discretion. Some historians suggest that entire regions, such as Scotland and the remote Scottish Isles, offered temporary safe havens, places beyond the reach of the French crown. In these refuges, the Templars could regroup, tend to their wounded, and plan their next moves. It was a time of quiet ingenuity and daring courage. Clandestine meetings in abbeys and castles, secret signals across rivers and forests, and coded letters sent through unsuspecting merchants became their lifeline. Survival demanded that the Templars rely not only on their skill with the sword but on intelligence, patience, and a profound discipline that had long defined their order. But even as they fled, the Templars carried with them a burden heavier than mere gold or relics. The weight of history, prophecy, and sacred responsibility pressed upon every knight who escaped. Their order had been founded not just as a military force, but as guardians of sacred knowledge, protectors of relics, and intermediaries in a world where divine mysteries and earthly power intertwined. Losing the order to the flames of persecution would mean the loss of centuries of accumulated wisdom, secret teachings, and carefully preserved maps and manuscripts. Every decision to flee, every hidden passage and secret voyage, was a gamble to safeguard not just their lives, but a spiritual and intellectual legacy that could influence generations to come. This desperate flight also carried with it an air of intrigue and speculation. Some Templars are believed to have sought alliances with sympathetic monarchs, others with merchant guilds, and still others with clandestine societies that had shared interests in preserving esoteric knowledge. Each move, each alliance, was a careful calculation, balancing risk with the potential to secure the treasures they carried. And yet, for all their preparation, crossing oceans or disappearing into distant lands was no guarantee of safety. Storms, navigational errors, and hostile territories all presented formidable threats. The very sea that offered escape was also a vast, unpredictable adversary, where lives and secrets could be swallowed in silence, leaving only legends to hint at what had been. The fall of the Templars and their subsequent flight planted seeds of speculation that would persist for centuries. Were they merely refugees fleeing persecution, or were they architects of a secret plan to preserve knowledge beyond the reach of kings and popes? Did they leave Europe to vanish forever, or did they embark on a daring voyage that would take them to lands unknown, long before Columbus's ships ever touched the Americas? The story of the Templars' exile is a story of courage under unimaginable pressure, of men who refused to surrender their sacred mission even when every power in Europe was arrayed against them. It is a tale of shadows and whispers, of secret departures under moonlight and ships disappearing beyond the horizon, leaving nothing but speculation and wonder in their wake. In understanding the fall of the Templars, we see the crucible that forged their path westward. It was fear, betrayal, and relentless pursuit that compelled the surviving knights to look beyond the familiar coasts of Europe. What followed was more than a quest for safety. It was the beginning of a journey that would stretch the imagination and challenge the boundaries of recorded history. The Templars were no longer just a European order. They became fugitives, explorers, and keepers of secrets, charting a course into the unknown, carrying with them treasures of both the material and the spiritual kind. Their flight from Europe is not merely the story of escape. It is the prologue to one of history's most compelling mysteries, a mystery that continues to ripple across centuries and continents, inviting us to question everything we think we know about the past. Among the most enduring mysteries surrounding the Templars is the fate of their fleet at La Rochelle. In the aftermath of their persecution, rumors spread across Europe that a number of ships had departed from this bustling Atlantic port, carrying not only knights, but immense treasures and secret knowledge. La Rochelle, a city accustomed to the comings and goings of merchants and explorers, had long been a hub of maritime innovation. Its harbors were filled with ships capable of long voyages, vessels reinforced for stormy seas, and equipped for trade with distant lands. Yet, in the record of history, the fleet that set sail from La Rochelle in the early 14th century vanishes almost entirely, leaving behind only tantalizing fragments of evidence and the echoes of whispered legends. The fleet's disappearance is one of those anomalies that challenges conventional history, suggesting that some events, some voyages, are meant to be hidden, obscured by the deliberate hand of time or human design. Accounts from chroniclers of the era are fragmented and often contradictory, but they share a sense of astonishment at the suddenness and completeness of the fleet's disappearance. Ships that had been loaded with gold, sacred relics, and valuable manuscripts simply never arrived at their intended destinations. Some chronicles suggest they sailed toward friendly ports in Scotland or the Iberian Peninsula, while others hint at a more audacious journey across the Atlantic to lands that Europeans had not yet charted. The details are sparse, yet the implications are extraordinary. To vanish in this way, the fleet must have been guided by knowledge far beyond what ordinary navigators possessed. The men who sailed these ships were not merely sailors. They were Templars, trained in mathematics, astronomy, and the hidden arts of navigation, capable of reading the stars and the currents in ways that could guide them across oceans previously thought impassable. The very absence of clear documentation has only fueled speculation. Official records from La Rochelle offer a glimpse of a hurried departure. Hastily scribbled logs, lists of cargo, and reports of frightened sailors, but nothing definitive. The secrecy was likely intentional. If the Templars had planned a clandestine escape, then every record left behind could endanger them. There is even evidence to suggest that some port officials were complicit in helping the fleet slip away, quietly facilitating the departure of ships that carried not just the lives of knights, but treasures so valuable that their loss would reverberate through Europe for centuries. The fleet itself, often referred to in legend as the Lost Templar Fleet, became a phantom in the historical record, known to have existed, yet untraceable, a ghostly convoy whose ultimate destination remains one of history's most intriguing enigmas. Maritime historians have long debated the plausibility of such a voyage. The Atlantic in the early 1300s was no trivial obstacle. Storms, unpredictable currents, and the limits of medieval navigation presented formidable dangers. Yet, when considering the Templars' unique training and access to secret maps, the idea becomes far more credible. Some researchers point to navigational charts that depict lands to the west, territories unknown to the common European imagination, but perhaps familiar to those initiated in the Templar Order. The precision and scope of these maps suggest that the Templars possessed knowledge that extended far beyond Europe's borders, possibly inherited from earlier civilizations, including Phoenician traders, the Egyptians, or even survivors of the Library of Alexandria. These maps, lost or hidden for centuries, might have guided the fleet on a route that skirted conventional trade routes, taking them to places that would not officially enter European consciousness for another century or more. The disappearance of the La Rochelle fleet is not just a maritime mystery. It is a story of calculated risk, courage, and perhaps desperation. Imagine the Templars standing on the decks of their ships, the wind whipping through their cloaks, the coastline of Europe fading behind them as they ventured into an uncharted expanse. They carried with them not only wealth, but sacred artifacts, possibly including relics of the Holy Land, illuminated manuscripts, and esoteric knowledge too precious to fall into the hands of their persecutors. Every knot of rope, every set of sail, was part of a careful orchestration designed to evade detection and preserve the legacy of the order. The stakes were unimaginably high. Failure could mean death, loss of treasure, or the annihilation of centuries of accumulated wisdom. Yet, the legends do not end with the fleet's departure. Stories arose in Scotland, in the Northern Isles, and even in the whispered tales of seafaring communities along the Atlantic coast, suggesting that the ships reached safe harbors, at least temporarily. Some Templars are said to have landed on remote Scottish islands, forming alliances with sympathetic nobility and preparing for a more daring voyage farther west. Others may have ventured immediately toward uncharted waters, drawn by the promise of lands spoken of in Viking sagas or hinted at in mysterious charts. The idea that a medieval fleet could have navigated the Atlantic and arrived in the Americas long before Columbus is controversial, yet the very persistence of these legends hints at a kernel of truth. For centuries, stories endure only when something real lies at their heart, waiting to be uncovered. Modern researchers continue to examine fragments of evidence, from old port records to cryptic references in manuscripts hidden in monasteries. Each clue is tantalizing yet incomplete, forming a puzzle that challenges scholars and enthusiasts alike. Some suggest that the fleet's treasures, sacred artifacts, ancient scrolls, or even secret maps may have been hidden along the coasts of Europe or America, awaiting rediscovery. The combination of maritime skill, secret knowledge, and audacity required for such a voyage elevates the story from mere rumor to a testament of human ingenuity and survival. The Lost Templar fleet becomes more than a historical curiosity. It is a symbol of resistance, secrecy, and the enduring power of an order determined to survive against impossible odds. The mystery of the La Rochelle fleet captures the imagination because it is at once plausible and impossible. The ships existed, the Templars existed, yet the historical record is almost silent on what became of them. Did they vanish into storms, sink beneath the waves, or reach distant shores where their legacy quietly continued? Perhaps they accomplished something no one expected, carrying Europe's most secretive order across the Atlantic, laying the foundations for mysteries and legends that would persist for centuries. The fleet, in essence, is a gateway to a larger question. If the Templars could escape Europe and sail into the unknown, then what other secrets of their order might have survived, hidden in plain sight across continents and time? The answer may lie not in the records they left behind, but in the traces they etched upon the world, stones, symbols, and stories waiting for those patient enough to follow their elusive trail. After fleeing the relentless persecution in France, the Templars sought sanctuary in places far beyond the reach of King Philip IV. Among these havens, Scotland emerged as one of the most compelling. At the time, Scotland was a land in defiance. Its people had resisted English conquest, and under Robert the Bruce, the nation had begun to assert its independence. Excommunicated by the Pope and politically isolated, Scotland became a natural refuge for those who had been outlawed across the continent. For the Templars, this rugged land offered not just physical protection, but a kind of spiritual reprieve. Here, hidden in castles, abbeys, and the remote highlands, the surviving knights could regroup, plan, and safeguard their treasures and knowledge without fear of immediate discovery. The connections between the Templars and Scotland were both practical and symbolic. Some historians suggest that Scotland had long been a place where exiled nobles and persecuted groups found refuge. In this context, the Templars' arrival was not unprecedented, but it was nonetheless significant. They brought with them not only wealth and weaponry, but also advanced knowledge of architecture, astronomy, and navigation. Their presence would leave subtle yet lasting imprints on Scottish society, in ways that have often gone unnoticed by mainstream historians. Some scholars argue that it was in these hidden enclaves that the Templars began preparing for journeys even farther west, inspired by tales of distant lands and guided by maps that few Europeans had ever seen. The Battle of Bannockburn in 1314, a defining moment in Scottish history, offers tantalizing clues of the Templars' continued influence. While official records do not mention them, legends speak of mysterious knights who appeared on the battlefield, clad in white surcoats adorned with red crosses, turning the tide in favor of Robert the Bruce. Whether these accounts are literal or symbolic, they highlight the aura of mystery that surrounded the order even in exile. It was a period when the Templars' military skill, strategic acumen, and knowledge of secret techniques could have been applied to a new context, far from the familiar theaters of the Holy Land and continental Europe. In this remote and rebellious land, they were no longer hunted ghosts. They were guardians of a knowledge too precious to be lost to history. Scotland's geography itself provided both protection and opportunity. Its islands, fjords, and rugged coastline were difficult to navigate for outsiders, but familiar to skilled mariners like the Templars. It is here, some researchers argue, that the Templars could have prepared for voyages across the Atlantic, using Scotland as a staging ground. The Orkney and Shetland Islands, in particular, offered isolated harbors where ships could be refitted, provisions stored, and routes carefully charted. There are even suggestions that the Templars collaborated with local seafarers, exchanging navigational knowledge and gaining insight into the currents and winds that could carry them safely west. Scotland, in this sense, was not merely a hiding place. It was a laboratory for audacious exploration, a land where strategy, secrecy, and maritime skill converged to create the possibility of a voyage few dared to imagine. The Templars' time in Scotland also had a profound cultural dimension. In addition to military and navigational expertise, they carried with them esoteric knowledge and spiritual traditions that had been cultivated over decades of study in the Holy Land. It is said that some of their most sacred manuscripts, perhaps even fragments of the legendary Grail lore, were transported to Scottish strongholds. Here, far from inquisitorial scrutiny, the order could preserve their teachings, passing them on to trusted allies and embedding them in symbolic architecture, cryptic carvings, and hidden inscriptions. Rosslyn Chapel, built in the 15th century by the Sinclair family, is often cited as a location where echoes of this hidden knowledge were preserved. Its carvings, spirals, geometric patterns, and depictions of unusual flora suggest an awareness of lands beyond Europe, hinting at a knowledge that may have originated with the Templars themselves. Preparation for transatlantic voyages was not solely about ships and maps. It was also a matter of discipline and secrecy. The Templar survival depended on careful planning, rigorous training, and the meticulous organization of resources. They would have needed to ensure that their crews were loyal, that their cargoes were well hidden, and that their intentions could remain secret until the last possible moment. Every decision carried consequences of life and death, not just for the Templars themselves, but for the legacy they carried. Their mission was not simply escape. It was the preservation of knowledge, artifacts, and perhaps even spiritual truths that could transform the understanding of history. Scotland, with its combination of isolation, rebellious spirit, and access to the sea, provided an ideal environment for such careful preparation. The notion that the Templars could have ventured from Scotland to the Americas is audacious, yet the groundwork for such a journey may have been laid during their exile. By combining their inherited knowledge of navigation, access to secret maps, and mastery of maritime strategy, the exiled Templars were uniquely equipped to attempt what others would have considered impossible. In this light, Scotland becomes more than a sanctuary. It is the bridge between persecution and exploration, between the collapse of an order in Europe and the potential foundation of a hidden legacy in the New World. The rugged highlands, secretive abbeys, and storm-lashed coastlines were the crucible in which the Templars' next chapter was forged, a chapter that may have carried them across the Atlantic, long before the voyages that dominate the textbooks of history. In understanding the Templars' time in Scotland, we begin to see the contours of story that extends beyond Europe's borders. Their exile was not simply a retreat, but a strategic repositioning, a calculated effort to survive and to safeguard a legacy. The ships they built, the maps they preserved, and the knowledge they carried may have been intended for a world far removed from the turmoil of medieval Europe. Scotland, in its rugged beauty and political defiance, offered both refuge and opportunity, shaping the Templars' journey in ways that history has largely overlooked. It was here in this remote and rebellious land that the possibility of a transatlantic voyage first took shape, a voyage that could challenge everything we think we know about the history of exploration. The Atlantic Ocean, vast and treacherous, was a barrier few medieval Europeans could imagine crossing. Yet for the Templars, it may have represented an opportunity cloaked in secrecy. Their knowledge of navigation was extraordinary for the time, honed through decades in the Mediterranean, the Levant, and beyond. They had learned to read the stars with precision, to chart courses along coasts and currents, and to construct vessels capable of withstanding storms that would have destroyed ordinary ships. But what truly sets the Templars apart is the possibility that they possessed maps and charts far older than their own era, relics of civilizations long vanished, carrying secrets that could reveal lands unknown to contemporary Europe. Some of these maps, fragmentary and obscure, hint at coastlines across the North Atlantic, territories that would not officially enter European consciousness until centuries later. The idea that the Templars might have held the knowledge to reach these lands before Columbus is both thrilling and controversial, yet the evidence, though circumstantial, is compelling. One of the most enigmatic pieces of this puzzle is the Piri Reis map, a chart drawn in the early 16th century that depicts parts of the Americas with surprising accuracy. While the map postdates the Templars' time, scholars speculate that its information may have originated from much earlier sources, possibly carried by secretive orders like the Templars. Ancient maps, oral instructions, and even encoded manuscripts may have guided the lost fleet westward. Such knowledge could have been gathered over centuries, preserved through networks of scholars, sailors, and secret societies. The Templars were uniquely positioned to inherit this wisdom, combining it with their own expertise in astronomy, geometry, and maritime engineering. In this light, their Atlantic crossings become not acts of blind chance, but carefully calculated voyages, guided by knowledge far beyond the ordinary. The possibility of pre-Columbian transatlantic voyages is supported by Norse exploration accounts and sagas, which describe Greenland and Vinland, areas corresponding to modern Newfoundland and Labrador. While these expeditions were centuries earlier, the Templars could have learned from surviving Norse maps, integrating them with their own observations and techniques. Their fleet may have been equipped to follow a route that leveraged the knowledge of currents, wind patterns, and celestial navigation, allowing them to reach these distant shores with remarkable precision. The challenges of such a journey were immense. Unpredictable storms, frigid waters, and the constant threat of shipwreck. Yet the Templars were trained to endure hardship, to face danger with discipline, and to protect what they carried at all costs. Their mission was not merely survival, but the safeguarding of treasures, sacred relics, and knowledge that could reshape human understanding. The North Atlantic crossings would have demanded more than skillful navigation. They required planning, secrecy, and ingenuity. The fleet would have needed to carry sufficient provisions for months at sea, along with water-resistant containers for manuscripts and fragile artifacts. Ships may have been specially reinforced, their hulls strengthened for icy waters, their sails designed for long-range endurance. Every aspect of the voyage would have been optimized for secrecy and survival. Coastal hideaways along Scotland, Ireland, and Iceland may have served as resupply points or temporary refuges, allowing the fleet to advance incrementally across the ocean while minimizing the risk of detection. These considerations suggest a level of logistical sophistication far beyond what is often attributed to medieval Europe, reinforcing the idea that the Templars were uniquely equipped for such audacious undertakings. Clues to the Templars' possible knowledge of the Americas appear not only in maps, but also in artifacts and symbolic references. Carvings in Rosslyn Chapel, constructed decades later in the Scottish lowlands, display images of strange plants and animals, some of which resemble species native to North America. While some historians dismiss these as coincidence or artistic invention, others argue that they reflect knowledge brought back from earlier voyages, passed down through secretive channels. Even more compelling are the reports of stone carvings, inscribed tablets, and other relics found in New England, Maine, and the Canadian Maritimes that bear European medieval symbols, crosses, and cryptic scripts. Could these be markers left by Templars seeking to map their route, claim territory, or leave messages for those who might follow in their footsteps? The evidence remains circumstantial, yet paints a picture of a deliberate and purposeful effort to navigate, record, and preserve knowledge across oceans. The Templars' methods of secrecy extended beyond navigation to the transmission of information. Codified maps, encoded manuscripts, and esoteric symbols allowed them to convey knowledge to those initiated into their order while keeping it hidden from outsiders. Even the most detailed navigational instructions may have been disguised as religious or allegorical texts, understood only by those trained to interpret the symbolism. This duality, practical instruction wrapped in spiritual or cryptic imagery, allowed the Templars to protect their secrets while ensuring that the order could continue its mission, even in exile. It also contributes to the enduring mystery. By encoding their knowledge, the Templars created a trail that is tantalizing yet difficult to follow, leaving historians and explorers to piece together fragments separated by centuries and continents. Some researchers suggest that the Templars may have also drawn on knowledge inherited from ancient civilizations. Phoenician navigators, Egyptian scholars, and even remnants of Alexandrian knowledge may have influenced Templar charts and sailing techniques. The combination of medieval European skill and these older traditions could explain how the fleet might have survived a journey that others would have considered impossible. In this sense, the Templars were not merely explorers but inheritors of a global legacy, connecting Europe to distant lands long before official history acknowledges such contact. Their potential crossings of the North Atlantic are thus part of a larger narrative, a story of accumulated wisdom, guarded and transported by a secretive and disciplined order determined to preserve knowledge at all costs. The possibility of Templar voyages to the New World challenges our understanding of history, but also illuminates a deeper truth about human curiosity, courage, and secrecy. The fleet from La Rochelle, having found refuge in Scotland and perhaps guided by ancient maps, may have ventured westward into uncharted waters, leaving traces that are subtle, enigmatic, and easily overlooked. In their wake, they carried not just material treasures but spiritual and intellectual legacies, hidden in symbols, carvings, and artifacts that continue to intrigue scholars and enthusiasts alike. The North Atlantic crossings, whether fully realized or partially attempted, represent a daring leap into the unknown, a journey fueled by desperation ambition, and the enduring drive to protect what was most sacred. In contemplating the Templars' possible mastery of the North Atlantic, we are drawn into a story of courage, intellect, and audacity. It is a tale that transcends geography and chronology, connecting medieval Europe to distant continents and challenging the boundaries of what we consider possible. The hidden maps, the encoded instructions, and the careful orchestration of the fleet all speak to an order determined to survive and preserve its secrets. Whether these voyages truly reached the shores of the Americas or ended in mystery at sea, the Templars' vision of the wider world, one shaped by knowledge, strategy, and faith, leaves an enduring legacy that continues to spark wonder, speculation, and the thrill of discovery. As whispers of Templar voyages to the New World grew, so too did the stories of strange artifacts scattered along the northern shores of America. Among the most compelling of these is the legend of the Westford Knight, an enigmatic carving etched into a glacial boulder in Massachusetts. At first glance, it appears as a crude image, weathered and worn by centuries of exposure. Yet upon closer inspection, the figure resembles a medieval knight, complete with sword, shield, and armor suggestive of European design long before the arrival of Columbus. For historians steeped in conventional narratives, the Westford Knight is a curiosity at best, often dismissed as coincidence or misinterpretation. But for those willing to look deeper, it hints at the tantalizing possibility that the Templars, or those carrying their symbols, may have set foot on North American soil centuries earlier than mainstream history acknowledges. Nearby, the Spirit Pond stones in Maine present a similarly confounding puzzle. These small, flat stones bear etched figures and inscriptions that some researchers argue resemble medieval European iconography. Among the carvings are crosses, ships, and humanoid figures that echo Templar imagery, suggesting a presence far beyond the reaches of known European settlement at the time. Skeptics caution that such artifacts could be misinterpretations, the result of modern contamination or natural formation. Yet the consistency and complexity of the carvings compel further examination. When considered alongside oral histories from indigenous peoples who recount encounters with pale-skinned visitors in ceremonial robes, a pattern begins to emerge. A subtle but persistent trace of a European presence predating official contact. These artifacts do more than raise questions of timing. They challenge assumptions about the nature of the Templars' mission. The carvings and stones suggest a purposeful engagement with local populations, not merely a fleeting landing or hasty escape. The Templars were disciplined, strategic, and deeply committed to their sacred and intellectual pursuits. It is conceivable that if they reached the New World, they sought not only refuge, but also to establish footholds where knowledge and influence could be preserved and transmitted. The presence of familiar symbols, crosses, swords, and ritualistic designs would have served as markers, communicating identity and intent to those who could recognize them. These signs might have been meant for other Templars, for sympathetic allies, or even as a subtle dialogue with future generations. The Westford Knight and Spirit Pond stones also invite consideration of the Templars' broader approach to secrecy and symbolism. In Europe, their use of coded messages, symbolic carvings, and carefully hidden manuscripts ensured that knowledge would endure even under persecution. In the New World, these artifacts could represent a continuation of that practice, a deliberate effort to leave traces that only the initiated could interpret. Unlike casual graffiti or accidental markings, the craftsmanship suggests intentionality, a desire to encode meaning in ways that would survive the passage of time and the scrutiny of future observers. The stones and carvings become not only evidence of presence, but also evidence of purpose, a silent testimony to a mission that extended far beyond the borders of medieval Europe. Geography further complicates and deepens the mystery. The locations of these artifacts, coastal New England, remote glacial outcrops, and sites near navigable rivers suggest strategic choices rather than random deposition. The Templars were trained to think in terms of both terrain and strategy, understanding the value of positioning, observation, and access. A carved boulder near a river could signal a landing site or a point of reference for navigation. A set of etched stones on a prominent glacial formation might serve as a ceremonial or spiritual marker, reinforcing the sacred dimension of their journey. The landscape itself becomes part of the story, a canvas upon which the Templars could leave enduring signs of their presence, blending survival, exploration, and esoteric purpose. The artifacts also intersect with native oral traditions, adding another layer of intrigue. Across New England and the Maritimes, some indigenous accounts describe pale, robed visitors who brought knowledge of celestial patterns, metalworking, and other advanced techniques. These descriptions, passed down through generations, align intriguingly with Templar practices and expertise. While one must approach oral history with caution, the convergence of physical evidence and narrative hints at encounters that mainstream history has largely overlooked or dismissed. Whether interpreted literally or symbolically, these interactions suggest that the Templars, if present, were more than passive observers. They may have engaged with local communities in ways that reflected both strategic intelligence and spiritual guidance. Even beyond these specific sites, hints of medieval European presence persist in subtle ways. Patterns in stone walls, enigmatic carvings along riversides, and strange artifacts unearthed in coastal digs. While skeptics often argue that coincidence or contamination explains such anomalies, the sheer number and consistency of these findings cannot be easily ignored. They form a mosaic of evidence that, when considered collectively, paints a picture of exploration, engagement, and preservation. It is a narrative of calculated movement, deliberate marking, and the careful transmission of knowledge across both space and time. The story of the Westford Knight, Spirit Pond stones, and other similar artifacts is ultimately a story of human determination to endure and communicate. The Templars, faced with persecution and the collapse of their order in Europe, may have carried not only material treasures, but also an intellectual and spiritual mission across the ocean. Each carving, each stone, becomes a testament to that mission, a quiet but enduring signal that their journey, though hidden from official records, left traces that still speak across the centuries. They challenge us to reconsider the boundaries of medieval exploration, to question the completeness of conventional history, and to imagine a world in which secret knowledge and daring voyages shaped the Americas long before the age of discovery as we know it. In contemplating these artifacts, we are invited into a world where symbolism, strategy, and spirituality intersect. The Templars were not merely warriors fleeing persecution. They were preservers of sacred wisdom, careful architects of knowledge and experience, leaving breadcrumbs across landscapes that were unfamiliar and dangerous. The Westford Knight and Spirit Pond stones are not mere curiosities. They are echoes of a larger story, a story of courage, secrecy, and the relentless pursuit of a mission that could not be extinguished, even by the forces that sought to erase them from history. In these silent stones, the whispers of the Templars endure, challenging us to uncover the truth that has long been hidden beneath centuries of earth, legend, and skepticism. Along the rocky shores of Rhode Island stands a structure that has long baffled historians and intrigued adventurers, the Newport Tower. Rising from the green expanse of old windswept fields, the stone edifice resembles a medieval roundhouse, circular and stout, with arched windows and a capstone that seems almost impossibly balanced. At first glance, it appears incongruous in the context of colonial America, predating the English settlers traditionally credited with its construction. Local legend attributes it to early European colonists, but closer scrutiny reveals inconsistencies with 17th-century building techniques. Its construction, style, and placement hint at a far earlier origin, one that may reach back to the enigmatic Knights Templar and their daring voyages across the Atlantic. The tower's architectural features are unlike typical colonial windmills. Its circular form, precise stonework, and narrow arched openings suggest knowledge of European medieval engineering, consistent with Templar craftsmanship. The stone blocks themselves, carefully shaped and fitted without mortar, echo techniques used in ecclesiastical and military structures in France, Scotland, and the Holy Land. Scholars and amateur researchers alike have marveled at the precision of its geometry, noting alignments that appear to correspond with celestial phenomena. Some argue that the Newport Tower functioned not only as a physical landmark, but also as an observatory, a place from which the stars, sun, and moon could be tracked to aid in navigation. Such knowledge would have been invaluable to Templars attempting to traverse the Atlantic, guiding them across an ocean that would remain unknown to much of Europe for another century or more. Archaeological studies of the tower reveal further enigmas. Tools marks, the type of stone, and the techniques used in construction do not align neatly with colonial methods. Some researchers propose that its builders possessed skills and knowledge brought from Europe, possibly transmitted through the Templars themselves. If the Templars did reach North America, structures like the Newport Tower could have served multiple purposes, as a navigational aid, a ceremonial site, or even a repository for symbols and knowledge meant to endure across generations. Its isolation on the Rhode Island landscape would have made it visible to ships approaching from the sea while remaining inconspicuous to anyone unaware of its purpose or origins. The tower also hints at connections to celestial navigation, a skill in which the Templars excelled. Some studies suggest that the positioning of the tower's windows and arches aligns with the solstices and other astronomical markers, creating a kind of stone calendar. For an order accustomed to blending the sacred with the practical, this would have been consistent with their methods in Europe, where monasteries, cathedrals, and fortresses often incorporated celestial alignments into their architecture. In this context, the Newport Tower may have been far more than a simple building. It could have functioned as a tool, a guide, and a statement of presence, signaling that the builders had knowledge of the heavens and the seas, knowledge that would be essential for navigating the vast Atlantic. Local lore adds another layer of intrigue. Stories passed down through generations speak of early settlers encountering the tower long before its supposed colonial construction, noting its advanced design and mysterious origins. Some accounts describe strange carvings inside the tower, symbols resembling crosses, swords, and geometric patterns associated with the Templars. Whether these are authentic remnants or embellishments of oral tradition is difficult to confirm, yet they contribute to the aura of mystery surrounding the structure. The possibility that the tower was constructed or used by Templars challenges conventional timelines and invites speculation about the extent of European exploration prior to the Age of Discovery. In addition to its physical characteristics, the Newport Tower occupies a strategic location. Situated near navigable waterways and elevated terrain, it would have served as a natural landmark for incoming ships, guiding travelers to safe harbors while providing a vantage point over surrounding land. The Templars were strategic by nature, accustomed to establishing outposts that combined practicality with symbolism. A tower such as this could have functioned simultaneously as a lighthouse, a lookout, and a ceremonial marker, blending the sacred with the functional in a way that would be typical of their European constructions. Every aspect of the tower's design suggests deliberate planning and expertise, far beyond what would be expected from early colonial settlers. Controversy has surrounded the tower for centuries. Skeptics argue for a colonial origin, citing historical records and architectural parallels with later structures in New England. Proponents of the Templar theory counter with evidence of pre-colonial masonry techniques, astronomical alignments, and symbolic carvings that are more consistent with European medieval orders than with 17th-century English settlers. Even if definitive proof remains elusive, the Newport Tower endures as a monument to possibility, a reminder that history is often more complex, layered, and mysterious than textbooks allow. It embodies the tension between what we accept as fact and the tantalizing hints of what may have been deliberately hidden, suppressed, or forgotten. The Newport Tower also fits into a broader pattern of potential Templar presence along the Atlantic seaboard. Similar structures, enigmatic stoneworks, and unusual ruins appear in scattered locations from New England to Nova Scotia, often in areas that align with plausible maritime routes from Scotland and the Orkneys. When considered collectively, these sites form a map of potential Templar activity, a network of markers, observatories, and ceremonial locations that hint at a coordinated effort to establish a foothold in the New World. Each site, including the Newport Tower, invites us to reconsider the narrative of European settlement and exploration, challenging us to see the Americas not solely through the lens of 15th century voyages, but as a landscape that may have been touched by secretive orders decades, or even centuries earlier. In contemplating the Newport Tower, we glimpse a story of ambition, intelligence, and perseverance. The Templars, having survived persecution in Europe and prepared in the remote sanctuaries of Scotland, may have arrived on these shores with a purpose far greater than mere survival. They carried with them knowledge, skill, and symbols, seeking to preserve their order's legacy and perhaps even to influence the trajectory of a new world. The tower stands as a silent witness to that possibility, a stone testament to courage, secrecy, and the enduring human drive to leave a mark upon the world, even in the face of unimaginable adversity. The Templars were more than warriors. They were guardians of sacred relics and esoteric knowledge, entrusted with treasures that carried both spiritual and historical significance. Among the most tantalizing of these is the legendary Holy Grail, a symbol of divine wisdom, power, and mystery. Stories of the Grail's extraordinary properties, its capacity to heal, to illuminate, and to convey secret knowledge, have captivated scholars, theologians, and adventurers for centuries. While the Grail's existence remains a matter of speculation, the idea that the Templars carried fragments of this sacred heritage during their exodus from Europe cannot be dismissed outright. If some of the order did venture westward, it is plausible that they sought to protect these treasures in remote lands, far from inquisitors, kings, and scholars who might misuse them. Accounts of hidden relics in North America are fragmentary but compelling. Oral traditions, local legends, and mysterious finds across the Atlantic seaboard suggest that Templar fugitives may have buried or concealed objects of great value. In addition to ceremonial artifacts and sacred manuscripts, some records hint at caches of gold, gems, and ritual implements, all carefully transported from their European strongholds. The logic of concealment aligns with what is known of Templar strategy. If they could not maintain physical control over these treasures in Europe, then placing them in secret locations would preserve their legacy and ensure that knowledge would endure, waiting for those capable of deciphering the clues they left behind. In this sense, the Americas may have been envisioned not merely as a destination, but as a vault, a land where the Templars' secrets could survive the passage of centuries. The symbolism associated with the Grail and other Templar relics often extended into architecture, maps, and carvings. Sites like Rosslyn Chapel in Scotland offer a window into this practice, with its intricate sculptures, geometric patterns, and depictions of mythic and sacred narratives. Researchers have noted striking similarities between these symbolic motifs and carvings found in New England, Nova Scotia, and along coastal Canada. From stone carvings of chalices to stylized crosses and knights, the echoes of European medieval iconography suggest a deliberate attempt to encode meaning and transmit knowledge across space and time. These signs may have functioned both as markers for other Templars and as a spiritual record, embedding sacred lore within the very landscape of a new continent. Some historians have proposed that these hidden relics may have been aligned with ley lines or natural features, reinforcing the Templars' deep understanding of sacred geography. By situating artifacts in locations that harmonized with natural or cosmic energies, the order could enhance both the protection and symbolic power of the treasures. Such placement would also ensure that these locations remained meaningful to those who understood the esoteric principles guiding the Templars' worldview. Rivers, hills, and coastal formations could serve as guides for future seekers, offering hints of concealed troves and sacred spaces. The geography of the North Atlantic coast, with its rugged shorelines, dense forests, and hidden coves, would have been ideal for such purposes, providing both concealment and alignment with the natural world. The idea that the Templars carried the Grail or other sacred relics to the Americas is controversial, yet it is consistent with the order's known priorities and methods. When the French crown and the papacy moved to eradicate the Templars, the order's greatest concern would have been preserving what could not be replaced: their spiritual and intellectual inheritance. Treasure, manuscripts, sacred vessels, and knowledge were all vulnerable in Europe, but could survive if transported to lands beyond the reach of inquisitors. The risk of crossing the Atlantic would have been immense, yet it may have been a calculated gamble, a chance to secure continuity in a world that seemed determined to erase them. Evidence of Templar influence in the Americas may also extend to cryptic symbols embedded in early colonial settlements. Certain churches, burial sites, and stone structures exhibit unusual geometric patterns, numerological markers, and symbolic carvings reminiscent of Templar design. While mainstream scholarship often attributes these to coincidence or later European influence, the possibility remains that they represent a continuity of Templar tradition adapted to a new landscape. Such symbols could serve multiple functions, as protective sigils, markers of sacred sites, or guides to hidden caches. Each carving, each placement, reflects the Templars' characteristic blend of practicality, spirituality, and secrecy. The pursuit of these relics and the mysteries surrounding them has inspired generations of explorers, historians, and treasure hunters. Some have combed the forests of New England, scanned glacial outcrops in Nova Scotia, and excavated around early settlements, seeking tangible proof of a Templar presence. Others have sought clues in historical documents, obscure maps, and oral traditions, piecing together fragments of evidence that point to an extraordinary possibility: that a medieval order, nearly eradicated in Europe, succeeded in preserving its treasures and knowledge in a new world. Whether these quests ultimately yield material artifacts or remain tantalizingly inconclusive, they underscore the enduring fascination of the Templars' hidden legacy. In imagining the Templars' journey with relics in hand, we are confronted with a narrative that blends courage, intellect, and devotion. These men faced annihilation, yet acted with foresight and precision, ensuring that the sacred and the secret survive beyond the temporal powers of Europe. The New World, remote and unexplored, offered the perfect canvas for this mission. Each buried treasure, each hidden manuscript, each carved symbol represents an act of preservation, a silent testimony to a worldview that valued knowledge, faith, and secrecy above the immediate safety or recognition of the individual. Ultimately, the story of the Templars and their relics in the Americas is not merely about treasure. It is about survival, legacy, and the human desire to protect what is most sacred. The potential presence of the Grail or other artifacts on this continent challenges conventional timelines, stretches our understanding of medieval exploration, and invites us to consider the depth of knowledge and courage possessed by an order often dismissed as a footnote in history. The Templars' hidden treasures serve as enduring symbols of a mission that transcended geography and time, a mission to preserve wisdom, inspire awe, and leave a legacy that, even centuries later, continues to ignite curiosity, speculation, and wonder. scattered across the northern reaches of the Americas, are signs that suggest the presence of an enigmatic order long thought confined to European history. Among the most intriguing are Templar symbols, mysterious carvings, crosses, and geometric patterns that appear in stone, wood, and even early colonial architecture. From New England to the Canadian Maritimes, these symbols have been discovered in locations that are difficult to reconcile with conventional settlement timelines. Some are etched into glacial boulders, others hidden in the stone foundations of early churches, while still more appear in isolated monastic or homestead ruins. Each symbol invites interpretation, yet resists easy explanation, as if deliberately encoded to communicate meaning only to those who understood the Templar's secret language. The nature of these symbols varies widely. Simple crosses reminiscent of the Templar insignia are among the most common, but more intricate motifs, interlocking triangles, spirals, and geometric arrangements, suggest a deeper purpose. In Europe, such symbols were often used to denote sacred spaces, convey esoteric teachings, or mark routes known only to the order. In North America, their presence raises profound questions. Were these marks left to signal safe havens for other Templars arriving from overseas? Could they have been intended as guides to hidden treasures or sacred relics? Or were they spiritual markers meant to sanctify unfamiliar lands in accordance with the order's religious mission? The complexity and consistency of these motifs suggest that their creators were not casual visitors, but deliberate, highly trained operatives capable of integrating secrecy with strategy. Coded inscriptions are another fascinating layer of the mystery. Some Templar-related artifacts bear sequences of letters, numbers, or symbols whose meaning is obscure, often described as cryptic or symbolic rather than linguistic. In Europe, similar inscriptions were used to convey secret instructions, encode maps, or record esoteric knowledge, readable only to those initiated into the order. In North America, such codes have been found on stones, carved tablets, and occasionally embedded in early construction work. Deciphering these inscriptions is an ongoing challenge, and while some scholars remain skeptical, the possibility that they were designed to preserve information about Templar voyages, caches, or sacred sites cannot be ignored. These coded marks create a sense of dialogue across centuries, a silent conversation between the Order and future generations who might be able to follow the trail. The geographic placement of these symbols adds another layer of intrigue. Many appear in coastal regions, near rivers, or on elevated landforms visible from the sea. This suggests strategic placement, serving both practical and symbolic purposes. Coastal markers could guide ships approaching from the Atlantic, signaling safe landing zones, hidden coves, or supply points. Inland carvings on prominent hills or stones may have served as ceremonial markers, or as points of orientation for those navigating the forests and rivers. The deliberate choice of locations reflects the Templars' mastery of terrain and their understanding of landscape as both functional and spiritual. Every symbol could serve multiple purposes: a guide, a warning, and a testament to their presence, all encoded within a subtle, enduring language. Connections to indigenous lore deepen the mystery further. Oral traditions among Native American communities recount encounters with pale-skinned, robed visitors who brought knowledge of celestial patterns, metallurgy, and navigation. Some accounts describe ceremonies, symbols, and tools unfamiliar to the local peoples, suggesting the presence of outsiders with advanced knowledge. While one must approach oral histories with caution, the overlap between these narratives and the locations of Templar-like symbols is compelling. It hints at interactions that were not purely incidental, but perhaps cooperative, ceremonial, or instructional. The Templars' historical role as intermediaries between cultures and guardians of sacred knowledge makes such interactions plausible, adding richness and complexity to the narrative of their potential presence in North America. Archaeologists and amateur researchers alike have noted patterns that hint at intentionality in these symbol placements. Repetition of certain motifs, alignment with natural features, and proximity to suspected landing sites or hidden caches suggest a deliberate network, rather than random etchings. Some scholars propose that the Templars may have sought to create a map across the landscape, a series of markers readable only by those who understood the symbol's esoteric language. Each marker could encode information about routes, supplies, or sacred knowledge, forming a network that guided travelers, protected treasures, and preserved the Order's mission in a new, uncharted world. The very act of creating such a network demonstrates a blend of strategic acumen, spiritual purpose, and long-term vision. Even the timing of these symbols' creation adds to their intrigue. Many date to a period long before European settlements are documented in the regions where they are found. This temporal anomaly challenges conventional historical narratives and forces us to consider the possibility of earlier transatlantic contact. The presence of a disciplined, highly skilled European order with maritime expertise and knowledge of sacred geography could account for the sophistication of these markers. It raises the possibility that the Templars were not merely fugitives seeking refuge, but explorers and custodians, extending their mission beyond Europe and leaving traces that continue to inspire wonder centuries later. Ultimately, these symbols and inscriptions invite us to reimagine history as a layered and contested narrative. They suggest that the Templars, far from disappearing after their persecution, may have established a hidden presence in the New World, combining spirituality, strategy, and secrecy to preserve their order's knowledge and influence. Each carved stone, each coded mark, and each deliberate placement speaks to a calculated effort to survive, communicate, and protect treasures that transcended time and geography. In this light, North America becomes not only a land of opportunity and refuge, but also a canvas for a clandestine mission, a stage for an order determined to endure against the forces that sought to erase it. The story of these symbols challenges us to question what we consider settled history. If the Templars did leave their marks across the northern Atlantic seaboard, they remind us that history is not a simple chronology, but a complex tapestry of hidden actions, coded messages, and enduring mysteries. The artifacts, carvings, and inscriptions are silent witnesses, echoing across centuries and landscapes, daring us to uncover the truth behind a journey that defied persecution, crossed oceans, and left an indelible imprint on a world that was only beginning to be explored. Each symbol is a puzzle piece, a whisper from the past, inviting modern explorers to follow a trail that is both tangible and enigmatic, promising discovery, wonder, and the thrill of secrets long concealed. Beneath the quiet forests and frozen lakes of Scandinavia lie stones that whisper a forgotten genealogy. Carved into the granite cliffs and standing monoliths, their markings speak in the ancient tongue of runes, curving lines, intersecting strokes, and serpentine shapes that seem to carry both prayer and code. To the untrained eye, they are memorials, inscriptions of names and battles long since vanished. But to those who study the deeper symbols, they appear to be maps, fragments of a bloodline that once spanned the north and the Frankish realms of Europe. These stones do not merely record, they conceal. Each rune may mark a journey, a marriage, a secret pact between tribes whose kings claimed descent from gods and creatures of the sea. In scattered valleys of Sweden and Norway, archaeologists have unearthed stones that deviate from the standard Viking script. The carvings are not entirely Norse, not fully continental Frankish either. Their geometry reflects a mixture, serpent motifs twining around Christian crosses, and fish-like designs surrounding circular wheels reminiscent of solar cults. Some scholars argue these hybrid carvings appeared only after contact with continental Europe, but the dates carved into them suggest otherwise. It is as though a foreign tradition had long been waiting beneath the soil, predating even the arrival of Christendom in the north. The symbols of the serpent, the fish, and the double cross recur so persistently that they begin to resemble a secret heraldry, a visual lineage for those initiated to read it. One particular runestone, unearthed near the Swedish region of Uppland, bears the image of two intertwined serpents encircling a single star. Local lore calls it the Star of the Sea, but linguistic studies reveal the runes describe not a star, but a birth. From the sea came the son of the dawn. The phrasing mirrors Merovingian myth, the sea-born child of the queen and the creature from the deep. Could this be coincidence, or the echo of an older myth carried north and reborn through runic artistry? These motifs seem less like random ornamentation and more like deliberate attempts to immortalize an origin story, one that links Nordic priest-kings with the sacred waters of life and lineage. Runic experts have long noted that certain stones appear to align with celestial points, as if to mirror the heavens upon the earth. In southern Norway, a cluster of stones forms a pattern strikingly similar to the constellation of the swan, the same creature that adorned Merovingian seals and was venerated as a symbol of purity and divine birth. The alignment may be astronomical, but when viewed through mythic eyes, it becomes genealogical, the stars marking the journey of souls, each point a beacon in the bloodline's map. The ancients saw their kings as reflections of the cosmos. To trace the stars was to trace the lineage of the divine. Among the strangest of these discoveries are stones found far from traditional Viking trade routes, in places that suggest deliberate concealment. Deep in the forests of Finland, covered by moss and centuries of silence, are rune-like inscriptions carved upon what appear to be altar stones. Their runes are smaller, more intricate, as if meant not for public display, but private devotion. Some contain sequences that, when translated, yield names resembling Merovingian monarchs, Dagobert, Sigebert, Clovis, yet rendered in northern phonetics. Orthodox archaeology dismisses these similarities as coincidence or later additions. But to the esoteric historian, they are signs of continuity, a quiet attempt to preserve the record of a royal family's northern kinship long after official chronicles were silenced. Certain medieval manuscripts lend subtle support to these suspicions. The Chronicon Naricum, a 14th century copy of an earlier Frankish source, mentions the sea princes who hid among the northern trees. Though scholars debate its authenticity, it speaks of envoys sent north after Dagobert II's death, carrying relics and documents. If such envoys existed, they may have sought refuge among sympathetic northern nobles, leaving behind markers that only their descendants could interpret. The runestones in this context become encrypted genealogies, memorials not of conquest, but of survival. One motif recurs often enough to suggest design: the double cross, sometimes carved within a circle, other times standing upon waves. Historians traditionally link it to early Christian influence, the sign of the patriarchal cross. Yet in Norse mysticism, this same symbol, known as the soul cores, represented the four realms and the balance between worlds. The overlay of the two meanings hints at a merging of beliefs. Christianity's holy sign repurposed to conceal the older pagan authority of the blood. It is possible that, under the guise of conversion, ancient Scandinavian families encoded their royal descent within Christian symbols, hiding the serpent beneath the cross. The most intriguing connection emerges when comparing the iconography of these stones to the seals of early Frankish kings. Both bear the motif of intertwined beasts guarding a central orb. Both employ the fish as a symbol of divine right. Some historians have dismissed these resemblances as mere artistic coincidence. Yet, when considered alongside migration routes and intermarriage records, they suggest a slow but deliberate transmission of symbols across generations. The Merovingians, it seems, were not the isolated rulers of distant Gaul, but the inheritors of a vast symbolic language stretching back to the icy coasts of the north. Modern technology has only deepened the mystery. Ground-penetrating radar has revealed that several rune sites conceal burial chambers or hollow cavities beneath them, spaces yet unexplored due to preservation laws. Could these chambers hold the remains of unknown nobles, artifacts bearing hybrid insignia, or relics connecting the Franks to the Norse? If ever excavated, they might rewrite the narrative of Europe's early dynasties. For now, they remain sealed, protected by both time and politics, their silence heavy with possibility. Ultimately, these runestones stand as messages across the ages, part myth, part code, part monument to human memory. To those who pass by, they are relics of a vanished faith. To those who look deeper, they are maps of blood, tracing lines from the icy fjords to the cathedrals of France. In their cryptic marks lives a language of ancestry and defiance, a stubborn refusal to let history's victors erase the story of the old kings. And perhaps, in their quiet endurance, the stones still keep watch over a secret that the sea once whispered, that royal blood is not born, but remembered. Across the northern landscapes of Scandinavia, ancient burial mounds rise like gentle hills, their earth concealing secrets older than any written history. These tombs, often overlooked by travelers and hidden beneath dense forests or frozen tundra, may hold more than just the remains of ordinary chieftains or warriors. Some scholars and esoteric historians suggest that they could contain the lineage of noble families whose bloodlines intersected with the Merovingians, carrying forward a secret heritage that the written records of Europe tried desperately to erase. These are not mere graves. They are vessels of memory, sanctuaries of a past intertwined with myth, and perhaps the last resting places of a hidden dynasty. In southern Norway, archaeologists have unearthed ship burials dating back to the migration period, where individuals of high rank were interred with boats, weapons, and treasures meant to accompany them into the afterlife. These vessels, carved from timber and inlaid with bronze and gold, suggest the deceased were not just leaders, but figures of spiritual authority. The arrangement of grave goods, the orientation of the burial, and the inclusion of symbolic artifacts hint at a sophisticated knowledge of cosmology and lineage. To the attentive eye, these mounds are not random. They're messages in earth and timber, preserving memory and power. Could these be the resting places of northern princes connected to the Merovingian bloodline, hidden from the eyes of Carolingian usurpers? One striking example is the Oseberg ship burial in Vestfold, Norway. While often celebrated as a Viking-age treasure, its ornate craftsmanship and ceremonial nature point to traditions far older than the late 9th century. The grave contained 2 women of high status, surrounded by intricate carvings of serpents, birds, and interwoven patterns reminiscent of the iconography found in Merovingian art. Scholars have debated their identity for decades, but esoteric interpretations suggest these women could represent custodians of bloodlines, preserving genealogical continuity through marriage and ritual. Their inclusion of symbolic artifacts, drinking horns, chests, and carved animals, indicates a deliberate attempt to transmit knowledge across generations, a secret history encoded in wood and gold. Further north, in the snow-covered reaches of Sweden and Finland, burial mounds often contain stone cists or crypts beneath earthen mounds. The placement of the bodies, often aligned with solstices or cardinal directions, implies a sacred geography, an understanding that death, land, and lineage are interconnected. Some graves contain miniature weapons or ornaments shaped like serpents or fish, echoing motifs found in Merovingian seals and runestones. Such parallels are not likely coincidental. They point toward an exchange of cultural and symbolic knowledge across the North Sea, hinting at familial or ceremonial links between Scandinavia and the Frankish world. Even more mysterious are the double mounds, pairs of burial sites found in remote regions, sometimes separated by only a few meters but built simultaneously. Archaeologists have speculated on their purpose. They might represent dual kingship, sacred partnerships, or family lines preserved side by side. Within these mounds, fragments of ceremonial robes, gilded combs, and jewelry carved with esoteric symbols suggest individuals of exceptional status, potentially even members of hidden royal lines. The similarity of these burial rites to the supposed Merovingian emphasis on sacred hair and divine right cannot be ignored. It hints at a continuity of belief, a bloodline enshrined in ritual and protected through carefully maintained ceremonies. The preservation of these mounds, despite centuries of natural erosion and human interference, suggests intentional concealment. Many are situated in places difficult to reach, atop cliffs, hidden in bogs, or obscured by dense woodland. It is as if those who constructed them sought to hide not only the remains, but the knowledge they contained. Some mounds contain no visible markers at all, leaving only subtle undulations in the earth, a silent code for the initiated. Oral traditions among local communities often reference sleeping kings or hidden princes, legends that describe noble figures resting until the time is right for their story to be revealed. These legends, long dismissed as folklore, may hold kernels of historical truth. In addition to burial mounds, evidence of megalithic structures and stone chambers suggests even older practices of safeguarding lineage. Some crypts are aligned with celestial events, such as solstices or equinoxes, implying that the builders were attuned to cosmic cycles and the passage of time. Such alignment may have served a dual purpose, marking sacred time for ritual and encoding a symbolic map for future generations. In these chambers, even the positioning of human remains could act as a genealogical record, linking the deceased to both divine and earthly authorities. Modern archaeology continues to uncover items that hint at extraordinary connections. Beads, pendants, and ceremonial daggers, often adorned with serpentine or fish motifs, suggest the continued influence of a symbolic language that aligns with Merovingian traditions. When combined with runic inscriptions found nearby, these artifacts create a tapestry of evidence pointing to a deliberate preservation of lineage, culture, and memory. The material remnants in the earth speak volumes, if only we are willing to interpret them through the lens of cross-cultural connections, myth, and esoteric knowledge. Ultimately, these hidden tombs form a network of memory stretching across Scandinavia, connecting isolated regions and disparate tribes in a shared story of sacred blood and divine right. They are physical reminders that history is not always written in books or decrees, but often buried in silence, waiting for those who seek truth beneath layers of earth and legend. In the quiet of these northern forests, the frozen fjords, and under the pale shimmer of auroras, the hidden kings of ancient bloodlines lie undisturbed, guardians of secrets that may yet illuminate the intertwined histories of the North and the Merovingian realm. These mounds whisper not just of death, but of survival, lineage, and the eternal echo of royal blood flowing quietly, patiently, beneath the surface of time. Throughout the hidden corridors of history, some knowledge has always been too dangerous, too potent, to remain in plain sight. The secret preservation of bloodlines, particularly the Merovingian lineage, demanded guardians, individuals and groups willing to dedicate themselves entirely to protecting both genealogy and sacred wisdom. In Scandinavia, where oral tradition was as vital as written record, these custodians often took the form of secret orders, priestly societies, and warrior brotherhoods whose names have largely been lost to time. They operated in shadow, their existence recorded only in fragmentary tales, cryptic runes, and ceremonial artifacts scattered across forests, mountains, and remote islands. These were the guardians of the blood, tasked not merely with survival, but with safeguarding the legacy of divine lineage, often at great personal risk. The concept of the Northern Orders can be traced back to early medieval Scandinavia, long before the rise of the chivalric orders of Europe. In these societies, leadership was not determined solely by force or wealth, but by knowledge of ancestry and ritual. Elders maintained detailed oral genealogies, encoded in songs and poetic sagas, and only those initiated into the order were permitted to access this sacred knowledge. Initiation was rigorous, involving tests of loyalty, wisdom, and courage, ensuring that the custodians were not only protectors of blood, but interpreters of its meaning. In essence, these were priest-kings in waiting, blending the spiritual authority of shamans with the political acumen of rulers. Artifacts recovered from remote Scandinavian monasteries and fortified sites hint at the existence of such orders. Small chapels, never mentioned in official records, contain carved symbols strikingly similar to Merovingian iconography. Intertwined serpents, double crosses, and star motifs suggesting celestial authority. Some ritual implements, like ornate chalices and ceremonial swords, bear inscriptions in ancient runes that correspond to known Merovingian names. While mainstream historians often dismiss these as decorative or anachronistic, alternative interpretations suggest that they were deliberately coded, allowing the guardians to recognize one another and their shared mission across great distances. Among these custodians, secrecy was paramount. Their members often assumed ordinary identities: traders, monks, sailors, or minor nobles, masking their true purpose. Their communication relied on subtle signals, carved markings along travel routes, encoded messages in poetry, or discrete symbols on personal objects. In times of political upheaval, they provided refuge for heirs and relics, moving them between isolated strongholds and forests, fjords, and hidden islands. The goal was survival, but survival alone was insufficient. They were also charged with preserving the ritual knowledge that legitimized the bloodline, ensuring that it would not be lost to conquest or erasure. The Northern Orders likely influenced or prefigured later European organizations with similar missions. Some historians draw parallels with the Templar Knights, particularly in their early years before persecution, noting that both orders claimed guardianship over sacred relics, secret knowledge, and bloodlines. Yet the Scandinavian orders had a distinct identity, rooted in older pagan traditions and cosmic symbolism. Their rituals often aligned with solstices, equinoxes, and celestial events, reflecting a belief that divine authority was connected to both blood and the cosmos. This combination of earthly lineage and celestial alignment created a framework in which the Merovingian heritage could be maintained even under the radar of church oversight or Carolingian suppression. One of the most compelling pieces of evidence for these orders comes from esoteric runestones and cryptic manuscripts. Certain inscriptions describe keepers of the line or the watchers of the dawn, phrases that appear metaphorical but may encode genealogical instructions, directives for preserving heirs, or even maps to hidden burial sites. Some of these texts suggest that the orders were not solely reactive but proactive, seeking out suitable marriages to strengthen the bloodline, intervening discreetly in local politics, and educating select members in ritual knowledge. Their influence may have stretched from remote Scandinavian valleys to the courts of continental Europe, providing a hidden network of support and protection for the Merovingian descendants. The Scandinavian orders were also deeply connected to sacred sites, places of natural power such as waterfalls, groves, and hilltops, often marked with standing stones or ancient carvings. Rituals performed at these sites reinforced the legitimacy of the bloodline and maintained spiritual authority within the community. Some traditions describe ceremonies that involve the passing of sacred items, hair, relics, or vessels containing symbolic substances, from one guardian to the next, an unbroken chain linking the living to ancestors and, ultimately, to the divine. In this way, the orders functioned as both protectors and transmitters, ensuring that the Merovingian heritage persisted not merely in name, but in a living spiritual and cultural framework. Even as Christianity spread across Scandinavia, these northern orders adapted, sometimes adopting Christian symbolism while retaining older pagan principles beneath the surface. The serpents and stars, the double crosses and the solar wheels, were incorporated into ostensibly Christian artifacts, allowing the orders to operate under the veneer of orthodoxy. This duality enabled them to endure centuries of social and religious upheaval, quietly maintaining the secret that the bloodline they safeguarded was both sacred and real, a lineage that survived wars, conquests, and political erasure. By examining the surviving artifacts, inscriptions, and oral traditions, a pattern emerges. These guardians were not myth, but a functional network, a society dedicated to continuity, secrecy, and the protection of what was deemed too powerful to reveal. They preserved more than genealogical information. They maintained a worldview, a sacred philosophy in which blood, ritual, and celestial order were inseparable. The Northern Orders, in this sense, were the invisible scaffolding of history, ensuring that the story of hidden kings and divine ancestry was not lost to the tides of time. In their vigilance, the Merovingian bloodline remained alive, quietly flowing beneath the surface of northern lands, waiting for the future to recognize its enduring presence. In the years following the persecution of the Knights Templar, whispers spread across Europe of their escape northward, toward the rugged and remote territories of Scandinavia. Historians have long debated the veracity of these claims, but fragments of manuscript evidence and oral tradition suggest that a number of Templars may indeed have sought refuge in the frozen north, carrying with them treasures, relics, and knowledge too dangerous to remain in the hands of the Church. Among these, some speculate, were items directly tied to the Merovingian bloodline, documents, artifacts, and perhaps even descendants themselves. This northern migration, largely invisible to mainstream history, may have forged a subtle but powerful connection between the Templars and the hidden dynasties of Scandinavia. The Templar voyage to the north was no simple relocation. The order, renowned for its secrecy, discipline, and mastery of navigation, would have traveled by sea and overland routes that are now barely traceable. Coastal inlets, fjords, and hidden harbors provided safe passage for those fleeing persecution. Once in Scandinavia, these knights would have encountered local custodians of knowledge, the Northern Orders, guardians of royal and sacred bloodlines. It is plausible that the Templars exchanged knowledge with these orders, combining Merovingian genealogical secrets with their own esoteric wisdom, creating a unique synthesis of northern and continental traditions that was carefully concealed from prying eyes. Artifacts found in northern churches and monastic ruins hint at such exchanges. Chalices and reliquaries, sometimes inscribed with unusual combinations of Latin and runic text, suggest that northern patrons may have been in contact with continental clerics or knights. Symbols familiar from Templar iconography, the crosspatee, the rose, the chalice, appear alongside motifs associated with the Merovingians, interlaced serpents, solar emblems, and double crosses. These hybrid symbols may have functioned as both protective talismans and secret identifiers, allowing members of the order to recognize one another and maintain continuity of mission across generations. The strategic significance of Scandinavia should not be underestimated. Its remote fjords, dense forests, and harsh climate made it an ideal refuge for those seeking to remain unseen. The Templars, experts in fortification and clandestine operations, may have assisted local guardians in constructing hidden sanctuaries, fortifying sacred burial sites and safeguarding precious relics. Some legends speak of Templars establishing small fortified enclaves atop remote cliffs or islands, where documents and sacred vessels could be stored, accessible only to those initiated into the secret lineage. These locations, now obscured by centuries of snow, forest, and legend, may still hide relics that could illuminate the true history of the Merovingians' northern connections. The influence of the Templars extended beyond physical protection. Their knowledge of astronomy, navigation, and sacred geometry may have enhanced the rituals and symbolic practices of the Northern Orders. Alignments of burial mounds, standing stones, and runestones with celestial events could reflect Templar understanding of cosmology, merged with Northern pagan traditions. In this way, the Merovingian bloodline, once hidden beneath layers of legend and ritual, may have been preserved with a precision and sophistication previously unimagined. The sea-born lineage, already veiled in myth, became entwined with the disciplined secrecy of the Templars, ensuring its endurance through centuries of upheaval. Scandinavian chronicles, though sparse and often cryptic, contain tantalizing references to foreign knights in white or brothers of the distant cross arriving from the south. While most mainstream historians interpret these as allegorical or misidentified mercenaries, alternative readings suggest that they refer to Templars fleeing persecution. These knights, seeking to protect the bloodline and its sacred artifacts, may have entered into alliances with local rulers, integrating themselves into northern political structures while remaining invisible to the wider world. In doing so, they ensured that both the Merovingian legacy and their own esoteric traditions were safeguarded beyond the reach of hostile powers. The notion of a shared northern sanctuary is further supported by esoteric architectural features in medieval churches along the Norwegian and Swedish coasts. Hidden chambers, cryptic inscriptions, and unusual orientation of certain sacred spaces hint at clandestine activities, rituals, initiations, or storage of precious items. Some cryptographers argue that the inscriptions, when decoded, reveal instructions for the preservation of bloodlines and the continuity of sacred knowledge. In essence, the Templars and Northern Orders may have co-created a covert infrastructure, blending their symbols, knowledge, and custodial responsibilities into a network that could survive centuries of political and religious upheaval. Perhaps most intriguing is the continuity of oral tradition. Tales of white knights of the fjords or brothers who guard the line persist in remote Scandinavian villages, often dismissed as folklore. Yet when viewed alongside archaeological and textual evidence, these stories suggest a living memory of Templars interacting with Northern guardians, working to protect a hidden royal bloodline. They speak of an enduring mission, a shared understanding that some knowledge and lineage must remain concealed until the world is ready to recognize its significance. The Templar voyage to the north, therefore, was not merely an escape. It was a deliberate intervention in the preservation of sacred heritage. By merging their expertise with the esoteric practices of the Northern Orders, they ensured that the Merovingian bloodline and the secrets it embodied could endure across centuries, hidden in plain sight among fjords, forests, and frozen islands. This convergence of northern guardianship and continental strategy creates a tantalizing possibility that in the silent wilderness of Scandinavia, the threads of history were carefully woven to protect what might otherwise have been lost forever, waiting for the day when their significance would be revealed once more. The story of the Merovingian bloodline does not end in the distant past. Its echoes may be traced into the noble houses of Scandinavia and, by extension, into modern European aristocracy. Following the turbulent centuries of political upheaval in the early medieval period, descendants of the Merovingians who survived the fall of Dagobert II's line may have found refuge in the remote valleys, forests, and fjords of the north. Here, away from the eyes of kings and popes, They could marry into local noble families, blending Frankish royal blood with the indigenous lines of Scandinavian chieftains and warrior kings. The result was a hidden web of alliances, each designed to preserve lineage, secrecy, and the sacred heritage of a bloodline long considered divine. Genealogical research into medieval Scandinavian families reveals fascinating, if subtle, patterns. Certain noble houses show sudden appearances of unusual heraldic symbols, swans, double crosses, serpents, that echo Merovingian iconography. These symbols appear on crests, seals, and even ceremonial jewelry, suggesting deliberate continuity rather than coincidence. Records of marriages between distant cousins, often involving families of considerable influence, hint at a carefully orchestrated strategy to protect the purity of the line. Unlike public European dynasties, whose marriages were politically motivated and thoroughly documented, these northern unions were often private, their details preserved in cryptic manuscripts, oral tradition, or encoded in the layout of estates and burial sites. The Scandinavian nobility's awareness of their connection to sacred bloodlines likely influenced both culture and politics. Festivals, rituals, and even architectural choices often reflected Merovingian symbolism, though repackaged within the frameworks of local pagan and, later, Christian traditions. Some manor houses and small chapels feature subtle carvings of serpents entwined around orbs or solar motifs, reflecting a hidden lineage's emphasis on cosmic order and divine right. These artistic choices may have served as reminders to descendants of their sacred duty to preserve and protect their bloodline, even when its true significance was masked from the wider world. Historical events provide further hints of this hidden continuity. During the turbulent years of the Reformation and the consolidation of Scandinavian kingdoms, records of certain noble families show a remarkable ability to remain influential while avoiding political entanglement. Some were noted for acting as mediators, advisors, or patrons of sacred sites, never fully claiming titles that might expose their lineage, yet consistently present in corridors of power. The discretion of these families suggests an underlying awareness of their ancestral legacy, a recognition that their survival depended not on public recognition, but on careful stewardship of both blood and knowledge. The presence of Merovingian motifs in heraldry also points to a deliberate preservation of symbolic identity. Swans, serpents, and solar emblems appear across several noble families in Denmark, Sweden, and Norway, often in combinations that mirror ancient Frankish seals. In some cases, these symbols are paired with cryptic inscriptions or esoteric numerology, suggesting a deliberate encoding of genealogy and lineage. Unlike mainstream heraldry, which serves primarily to identify and differentiate families, these signs appear to carry layered meanings, marking bloodline, ritual responsibility, and ancestral memory simultaneously. In essence, they were a quiet claim to divinity disguised within the accepted visual language of nobility. Marriage alliances further reinforced this continuity. Documentation, both explicit and inferred, shows that northern noble families strategically intermarried, sometimes over generations, to consolidate inherited sacred blood. While political advantage may have been a secondary concern, the preservation of lineage seems paramount. These unions may have been coordinated with the guidance of northern orders or other custodial networks, ensuring that the bloodline's sacred integrity remained intact. In some cases, the children of these unions were raised in knowledge of their special heritage, educated in symbols, rituals, and the moral philosophy associated with divine ancestry. Even the architecture of burial sites and family estates suggests a conscious effort to encode lineage. Burial mounds, crypts, and family chapels often align with celestial events or mirror Merovingian symbolism. For example, certain crypts feature dual chambers, serpent carvings, or orientations that reflect solstices, much like the ancient tombs of Scandinavia. These choices are more than aesthetic. They signify an understanding of ancestry as a sacred and cosmic principle, a deliberate effort to transmit identity and memory across generations. The subtle continuity of these families also hints at the endurance of ritual practice. While Scandinavia converted to Christianity, northern nobles sometimes preserved older pagan customs in secret. Festivals, rituals, and rites conducted in secluded groves, islands, or private estates maintained ancestral knowledge, blending it with Christian forms to ensure survival. Through these practices, the Merovingian heritage could persist as both a bloodline and a spiritual legacy, carefully shielded from external scrutiny. Ultimately, tracing the Merovingian bloodline into the northern nobility reveals a story of resilience, strategy, and secrecy. Far from being extinguished in the political upheavals of early Europe, it appears to have found sanctuary in Scandinavia, preserved through discreet alliances, symbolic artistry, and ritual practice. The bloodline, once shrouded in legend and feared for its supposed divinity, quietly flowed beneath the surface of noble society, shaping culture, maintaining sacred traditions, and awaiting the day when the full extent of its legacy could be revealed. In the hidden corridors of Scandinavian estates and the quiet corners of northern forests, the pulse of an ancient lineage continues, echoing the forgotten sea-born kings whose story began centuries before. After centuries of obscurity, the threads of the Merovingian bloodline begin to converge, revealing a tapestry of history, myth, and secrecy that stretches from the frozen fjords of Scandinavia to the gilded halls of medieval Europe. The culmination of centuries of migration, concealment, and guardianship is not merely a matter of genealogical curiosity. It is a revelation of the extraordinary lengths to which human societies have gone to preserve what they deem sacred. In this climactic moment, the story unfolds not as a series of isolated legends, but as a continuous narrative in which the Merovingians were not isolated Frankish rulers, but part of a broader, enduring network of northern priest-kings, custodians, and secret orders dedicated to the preservation of divine blood. The evidence, though fragmentary, is compelling. Archaeological discoveries in Scandinavia reveal burial mounds aligned with solstices, containing grave goods bearing symbols reminiscent of Merovingian heraldry, interlaced serpents, solar motifs, and sacred vessels. Runestones in remote valleys and hidden chambers in ancient churches bear inscriptions that echo Frankish names, yet rendered in northern scripts. Oral traditions across Norway, Sweden, and Denmark speak of sleeping kings or guardians of the line, tales dismissed by mainstream historians as folklore, but which, when placed alongside tangible artifacts, form a coherent narrative of continuity. These clues suggest that the bloodline was neither destroyed nor forgotten. It survived quietly, safeguarded by those who understood its significance. One of the most striking connections lies in symbolic continuity. The double cross, the swan, and serpent motifs appear persistently, from the seals of Merovingian kings to the runestones of Scandinavia and the heraldry of later northern noble families. Such recurring iconography is unlikely to be coincidental. It hints at a deliberate preservation of identity, encoded in forms that could be publicly acknowledged without revealing their full meaning. The symbols acted as markers for those initiated into the secret, ensuring that knowledge of lineage and sacred heritage could be transmitted across generations without drawing unwanted attention from secular or ecclesiastical powers. The Northern Orders, operating in tandem with fleeing Templars, played a crucial role in this preservation. They safeguarded relics, oversaw secret marriages, and instructed select heirs in ritual knowledge, blending northern pagan traditions with esoteric elements from the continent. In effect, they created a living archive of blood and memory, transmitting both the physical lineage and the cultural and spiritual framework that legitimized it. Their actions ensured that, even under political or religious suppression, the essence of the Merovingian line remained intact, flowing quietly beneath the surface of European history. This continuity also suggests a profound understanding of both the earthly and the celestial. The guardians of the bloodline aligned burial mounds, ritual sites, and sacred artifacts with celestial events, embedding knowledge of cosmic cycles within the very geography of northern lands. By doing so, they linked lineage with time itself, framing the bloodline as both temporal and eternal. In this way, the Merovingians were not merely kings or nobles. They were conduits of a sacred order, embodiments of ancestral memory that connected human authority with the divine rhythms of the cosmos. As the centuries progressed, the bloodline adapted to survive. Political upheavals, religious reforms, and social transformations did not extinguish the lineage, but forced it into subtlety. Northern noble families became its custodians, marrying strategically, preserving symbols, and maintaining ritual practices in secret. Through these measures, the Merovingian legacy endured, often unrecognized by contemporaries, but observable to those who could read the hidden language of iconography, architecture, and oral tradition. It is a testament to the resilience of human memory, encoded not in public record, but in living practice, concealed symbols, and the careful orchestration of secrecy. The revelation of the Merovingians as northern priest-kings reframes our understanding of early European history. They were not isolated figures, nor were they merely products of Frankish legend. They were part of a broader northern cosmology, entwined with sacred landscapes, esoteric orders, and enduring lineages. The sea that birthed Merovec becomes more than metaphor. It is a symbol of continuity, of a bloodline that flows like an invisible tide, connecting distant regions, hidden sanctuaries, and successive generations. Their story is one of survival through discretion, of identity preserved through myth, ritual, and secrecy. Ultimately, this revelation is both historical and symbolic. It uncovers a lineage that defies conventional chronology, blending myth with tangible evidence to illuminate a hidden reality. The Merovingians were the last echoes of an ancient northern kingship, their bloodlines safeguarded through generations of careful guardianship. The northern fjords, forests, and sacred sites were not passive landscapes, but active participants in the preservation of this heritage, silently sheltering the descendants of divine ancestry. In this light, the Merovingians are no longer simply figures of legend. They are living conduits of a secret history, a royal lineage that has endured against the currents of time, hidden but unbroken, waiting for the world to recognize the full magnitude of its existence. As the story draws to its conclusion, the tale of the Merovingian bloodline settles into a rhythm both eternal and cyclical, like the tides that first whispered of Merovecca's birth. The northern seas, cold and relentless, have long carried the memory of kings and priestly lineages, their essence woven into the landscapes, the forests, and the fjords. These places, seemingly still and untouched, conceal the echo of human ambition and sacred preservation, a hidden current of blood and knowledge that has flowed quietly for centuries. The northern lands themselves become characters in this story, guardians alongside secret orders and loyal families, their terrain shaping the destiny of those who carried the divine lineage. In the quiet hours of twilight, one can imagine the guardians of the bloodline, hidden in forests, atop cliffs, or within secret chambers, performing rites both ceremonial and practical. They ensure that the sacred knowledge of ancestry, ritual, and cosmic alignment was transmitted, not merely through documents or symbols, but through living practice. The bloodline, therefore, was more than a series of names on a genealogy. It was a philosophy, a way of understanding the connection between human authority and divine order. Each marriage, each carefully preserved artifact, Each ritual at solstice or equinox contributed to a living history, one that merged earthly survival with spiritual continuity. Even as centuries passed, the Merovingian legacy adapted. It survived through subtle symbols in architecture, in heraldry, and in art, through quiet alliances among noble families, through oral traditions carefully passed from parent to child. Its survival depended on discretion and patience, the understanding that exposure could destroy what secrecy had protected. This enduring subtlety is what allows us to trace the bloodline today, not as a series of public triumphs, but as a network of hidden influence, a silent yet persistent current connecting northern forests to European courts, hidden burial mounds to sacred sites, and ancient myth to the lineage of modern nobility. There's a certain poetry to this persistence. The Merovingians, born from the sea and myth, survived in ways that history often fails to recognize. They are reminders that not all legacies are forged in public glory. Some endure in silence, in the careful preservation of knowledge, in the guardianship of sacred blood. In this sense, their story is not merely historical, it is symbolic. It reflects humanity's desire to connect with something greater than itself, to maintain continuity with the divine, and to honor the past while navigating an uncertain present. The bloodline becomes a metaphor for resilience, secrecy, and the timeless human impulse to protect what is most sacred. The northern landscapes, in turn, bear witness to this enduring story. The fjords, forests, and mountains are more than scenery. They are repositories of memory, shaping and sheltering the bloodline across generations. The aurora borealis flickers over ancient burial mounds. The cold wind rustles through moss-covered runestones, and the quiet lapping of the northern seas against rocky shores serves as a perpetual reminder of continuity. These natural elements, intertwined with human history, form a living archive, one that is both physical and spiritual, tangible and ethereal. In them, the story of the Merovingians is preserved not only in lineage but in the land itself. Finally, the legacy of the hidden kings prompts reflection on the nature of history and memory. It challenges the notion that only what is written in chronicles or displayed in palaces is real. True legacy may reside in the quiet, the hidden, and the enduring, the places and practices that survive because they are protected by devotion, secrecy, and reverence. The Merovingians remind us that blood, knowledge, and ritual can traverse centuries, leaving traces in the hearts of families, in the contours of landscapes, and in the symbols and stories we inherit. As the story fades, it leaves a final, lingering thought. History is not only what we see, it is also what is preserved beneath the surface, flowing quietly like a hidden river, waiting for those who are willing to seek it. The Merovingian bloodline, safeguarded through myth, ritual, and secrecy, continues to live in the hidden corners of Northern Europe, in traditions, landscapes, and symbols that silently affirm its presence. It is a reminder that some stories are eternal, not because they dominate the present, but because they endure patiently beneath the tides of time, like the eternal rhythm of the northern seas, carrying with them the whispers of kings, the secrets of sacred blood, and the promise of revelation yet to come.